My name is George Walker, and for most of my 69 years, I've lived the same way: slow mornings, early nights, and honest work on the small farm my father left me in Iowa. The kind of life people used to respect. These days, folks like my son-in-law, Ethan, call it outdated. Last weekend, I attended Ethan and my daughter Laura's wedding in Des Moines. It was the kind of fancy event where the champagne flowed like water, and everyone seemed allergic to sincerity. I wore my best brown suit, the same one I wore to my wife's funeral, and kept to myself, proud but quiet. Everything was going fine until Ethan took the microphone. What started as a toast quickly turned into a roast. He laughed about my old tractor, about how Dad still thinks a handshake is a contract, and how someday we'll upgrade him to Wi-Fi. The guests laughed. My daughter laughed too, though hers was nervous. I didn't respond. I just smiled, raised my glass, and let them enjoy their show. Because the next morning, none of them would be laughing. Tell me where you're watching from, and hit like if you've ever stayed silent, knowing payback doesn't need noise, just timing. The drive back to my motel that night was quiet except for the hum of the tires on the highway. The laughter from that ballroom still echoed in my head. It wasn't the first time Ethan had mocked me. He'd always seen me as some dusty relic from another era, but doing it in front of 200 guests. That was new. That was public. I pulled into the gravel lot, cut the engine, and just sat there for a while, staring at my hands on the steering wheel. These hands had built barns, fixed fences, and pulled calves at 3 in the morning. They had held my wife's hand through cancer, buried my parents, and raised a daughter I thought knew better. And now, they were shaking. Not from age, but from anger I hadn't felt in years. I went inside, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out the window at the empty road. The world had moved on, I thought. Folks like Ethan, with his MBA and slick talk, believed respect came from money and followers, not from keeping promises. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. It was my neighbor and oldest friend, Tom Richards, still wearing the same denim jacket he'd owned since the Reagan years. "George," he said, stepping inside. I caught the live stream. "The what?" "The wedding," he said, pulling out his phone. "They posted it online. The kid's toast is all over TikTok. 500,000 views. Comments calling you Farmer Grandpa and Cornfield Classic." He showed me the video. I didn't want to look, but I did. Ethan's smug grin filled the screen as he mimicked my voice, pretending to talk about the good old days when you plowed with a mule. The crowd roared. I didn't say a word. I just handed Tom his phone back. "You gonna let that slide?" he asked quietly. I turned to the small desk in the corner and pulled out a faded envelope. Inside was something I hadn't touched in years, a contract and a USB drive from when Ethan had come to me 2 years ago, asking for help expanding his startup. Back then, I'd believed him. I'd taken out a $120,000 equity loan on part of my land to help fund his app idea, something about real estate analytics. He'd promised to repay me in a year. I hadn't seen a single dollar. When I'd asked about it months ago, he'd brushed me off. "Paperwork takes time," he'd said. "You wouldn't understand how these things work, George." But Isabel, my late wife, used to say something that came back to me that night: "A lie always trips over its own feet, you just have to give it time." I slid the USB into my old laptop. It whirred like a tractor starting in winter. The folder name was Harvest Equity Holdings. It contained tax filings, loan records, and bank transfers. Ethan had used my name, my land, and my signature to secure government grants meant for veteran-owned small businesses. He wasn't a veteran, I was. He'd forged documents to make it look like I was his silent partner, pocketed the funds, and then left me holding the bag. I sat back, staring at the screen. Every click showed another betrayal. $40,000 here. $15,000 there. Enough to sink my farm if anyone ever audited it. Tom whistled low. Jesus, George. He's got you lined up for the fall. I closed the laptop and exhaled. No, I said quietly. He lined himself up. That's when I made a decision. No yelling, no fighting, no revenge fantasy. Just simple, methodical truth. I picked up the phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, Detective Sarah Callahan, a local investigator who once helped me track down stolen farming equipment. She owed me a favor, and she'd never liked Ethan. When she answered, her voice was groggy. George. It's midnight. Sarah, I said, steady and calm, I need you to come by my place at sunrise. Bring a cup of coffee and a clean notepad. I've got something that's gonna make your morning. There was a pause. What kind of something? The kind that'll be on every TV in Iowa tomorrow, I said. And probably the news. I hung up and turned off the lights. Outside, the fields were still. The same stars that had guided my father's seasons were shining over mine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I felt ready. At sunrise, the Iowa sky was streaked in pink and gold, the kind of dawn you only get after a night when something inside you changes. I made coffee the way I always did, black, strong, 1 sugar, and waited on the porch. At exactly 6:15, I saw Sarah's old silver Ford pull into the driveway. She stepped out, still in jeans and a sheriff's jacket, her blonde hair tied back, her expression already sharp. She'd been up all night. Morning, she said, climbing the steps. You sound too calm for a man who just got humiliated in front of half the internet. I'm not mad anymore, I said, sliding the USB across the porch table. Just tired of pretending that kids' laughter means something. She plugged it into her tablet and started scrolling. Her face changed fast, from curiosity, to confusion, to something colder. These are SBA loan documents. Federal level. And look at this, he filed them under a Veterans Partnership Clause. George, he used your service record. Figured as much, I said, sipping my coffee. She looked up. You understand this is fraud, right? And not just small-town fraud. We're talking prison time. Minimum 5 years. Maybe more if he pulled this across state lines. I'm not asking you to arrest him, I said. Not yet. I just want the truth to come out on its own. She studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. You always were more patient than most. I took a folded paper from my pocket, the old loan contract Ethan had made me sign. He used my farm as collateral. I want to know if he actually filed the lien. She glanced over the document. If he did, it's in the county recorder's database. Give me a few hours. Sarah left, tires crunching down the dirt road. I sat there a while longer, watching the morning mist roll off the fields. Every row of corn seemed to whisper the same thing Isabel used to tell me, the land remembers who treats it right. Around 9, I drove into town. Main Street was already alive with weekend traffic, kids biking past the diner, old farmers fueling up at Casey's, and people who'd seen that wedding clip giving me half-sympathetic, half-curious looks. Word travels fast in small towns. I parked outside Henderson Feed and Supply, picked up a bag of seed, and tried to ignore the whispers. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. Sarah, you were right. He filed a fake lien. Attached under a Shell LLC. Come to my office. My hands tightened on the phone. A shell company. Of course. Ethan's arrogance ran that deep, he'd used corporate tricks he barely understood to hide theft he thought no one would notice. At her office, Sarah showed me the screen. The lien had been filed 6 months ago under Prairie Sky Investments LLC, listing my property as partial collateral for research and development expansion. It was signed by both our names, but mine was scanned. Classic forgery, Sarah said. And if this got audited, you'd be the one the IRS comes after. She leaned back. George, this is bad for him. But it's worse for anyone tied to him. You sure you want to go public? I looked her straight in the eye. He made a show out of mocking me for being old-fashioned. Let's see how he likes an old-fashioned reckoning. She chuckled. All right. I'll have the paperwork ready by noon. The state business registry will flag it automatically. Once it hits, the media gets notified through the SBA fraud alert feed. Meaning? I asked. Meaning by tomorrow morning, she said, closing her laptop, Ethan Myers will be trending for all the wrong reasons. I spent the rest of the day back on the farm, trying to keep busy. I fixed a broken fence post, cleaned the henhouse, and replaced the light bulb in the barn that had been flickering for weeks. Routine steadied me. Around sunset, my daughter showed up. Laura. She was still in her wedding dress, creased now, makeup smudged, her eyes red. She looked like she'd run straight from the hotel. Dad, she said softly. Why didn't you tell me you hated him that much? I looked at her, tired but calm. Laura, I didn't hate him. I just saw what you didn't want to see. She flinched. He said you were jealous. That you couldn't stand someone younger having success. Success. I repeated, leaning on the fence. That man built his life out of borrowed money and lies. And he built his wedding toast out of my name. She shook her head. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said. And tomorrow, so will you. She bit her lip. What do you mean? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked over to her and put my hand on her shoulder. Whatever happens next, I want you to remember something, honey, truth doesn't humiliate you. It humbles you. She blinked, confused and hurt. You're scaring me. I'm not trying to, I said softly. But you should pack a bag. It's gonna be a long week. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 a.m., the phone buzzed again, Sarah. Sarah, state-confirmed fraud alert. News outlets picked it up. The SBA director's office is investigating. Brace yourself. It's going national by morning. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. A quiet part of me wondered if Isabel would approve of what I'd done. But then I remembered her last words, whispered in that hospital room, don't let anyone turn our work into their greed. By sunrise, my porch was filled with the smell of coffee and the faint hum of a news van pulling up to the end of the driveway. My phone started buzzing non-stop. Headlines flashed across the screen. Local tech CEO under federal investigation for grant fraud. SBA confirms fake veteran partnership scheme in Iowa. Meet the farmer whose name exposed $1 million lie. They had his mugshot already. Ethan's face, pale and shell-shocked, plastered across every news site and TV channel. The same face that had laughed at me in front of hundreds. By 8 a.m., Laura called again. This time, her voice was trembling. Dad, he's been arrested. They came to the hotel. He's saying it's all a mistake, that he didn't know what he signed. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, I said, he knew. He just never thought the old man he mocked would still have enough sense to read the fine print. She started crying. I'm so sorry, Dad. For everything. I closed my eyes, listening to her breathe on the other end. It's all right, sweetheart. We all learn what kind of people we've married, one day or another. I stepped outside, the morning sun spilling over the fields, the reporters' voices echoing faintly from the road. I didn't care about the cameras, the headlines, or the justice system. All I cared about was that my wife's land, my life's work, was safe again. Ethan had wanted fame. And now he had it. Just not the kind he'd planned. By noon that day, my quiet little town of Clearfield didn't feel quiet anymore. The road outside my property was lined with camera vans and curious neighbors pretending they were just driving by. Local news anchors stood in front of my gate, microphones raised, trying to get a shot of the farmer who exposed the fraud. I didn't say a word to any of them. I kept working. I shoveled feed, stacked hay, fixed the latch on the chicken pen. Work had always been my way of thinking. Inside, the old landline wouldn't stop ringing. Every station wanted an interview. The Des Moines Register left a message calling me a symbol of integrity. But I wasn't after symbols. I was after truth, and truth had already done its job. Around 2 p.m., a black sedan pulled into my driveway. It wasn't a news crew this time. It was Agent Miller, from the SBA's Office of Inspector General, short man, calm voice, eyes like steel. He introduced himself with a firm handshake. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I wanted to thank you for turning over that evidence. What you did saved us weeks of digging." "I didn't do it for gratitude," I said, leading him to the porch. "I did it because some people forget where decency ends and greed begins." He nodded, flipping open his folder. "We've confirmed at least 3 fraudulent filings under your name, totaling about $740,000 in federal grant money. Your son-in-law and 2 of his associates were arrested this morning in Des Moines. We've also cleared you of any wrongdoing. The press doesn't always get that part right, but we'll make sure the record does." "Good," I said simply. "Because I'm not interested in headlines. I just want my land free and clean." Miller gave me a small smile. "It already is." His liens were fake, and the states nullified them. "You'll get a formal letter this week." He paused. "But I have to ask, Mr. Walker, why didn't you come to us earlier? You could have saved yourself a lot of trouble." I looked out toward the fields. The wind moved through the corn like a slow wave. "Because I was raised to give people enough rope to hang themselves. I just didn't expect him to do it so fast." Miller laughed softly. "Fair enough. If we need a statement, we'll call. You'll probably get more attention than you want for a while." "Attention doesn't plow fields," I said. He left soon after, and for the first time in days, the farm felt peaceful again. But peace never lasts long in a small town, especially when there's gossip as fresh as this. That evening, I drove into town for groceries. As I pulled into the parking lot of Benny's Market, I noticed how quiet it got. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Then, slowly, people started approaching me, not with mockery, but with something close to respect. "Mr. Walker," said Nancy, the cashier who'd always teased me for paying in cash, "we saw the news. That was brave, what you did." I shook my head. "Wasn't bravery. It was housekeeping." She smiled awkwardly. "Still, good on you." When I got to the register, the young clerk bagging my groceries, some kid barely 20, looked at me wide-eyed. "Sir, my dad showed me your story this morning. He said you're what people used to call a real man." That one caught me off guard. I just nodded, took my bags, and left. Outside, the evening light was soft and gold. I sat in the truck for a moment, hands on the wheel, letting it all sink in. Humiliation one night, headlines the next. Life had a way of turning circles fast when you stopped trying to control it. When I got home, Laura's car was already in the driveway. She was sitting on the porch steps, wearing jeans and an old sweater, one of her mother's. Her eyes were red but calmer than before. "Dad," she said, standing as I walked up, "I didn't come to fight. I don't know how to start." "Then don't," I said. "Just sit." We sat side by side, listening to the cicadas start their song. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "He called me from jail." "He said you set him up." I sighed. "No, Laura. He set himself up. I just gave him the rope." Her voice cracked. He said it was all just a misunderstanding. I turned to her. If a man steals your name, your work, and your honor, that's not a misunderstanding. That's character. Tears welled up again, but this time they weren't angry. I was blind, Dad. I kept defending him because I didn't want to admit I'd chosen wrong. I put a hand on her shoulder. We all make bad choices. The trick is not living in them. She looked down, fiddling with her wedding ring. The media won't stop calling. They're saying I must have known. I didn't, I swear I didn't. I know, I said gently. And anyone who matters will know too. She hesitated, then took the ring off slowly and set it on the porch railing. It gleamed once in the sunlight before rolling to a stop. I don't want that life anymore. I nodded. Good. Because it was never yours. Later that night, when she'd fallen asleep in the guest room, I stepped outside. The moon was bright over the fields, silvering the tops of the rows. I sat on the porch with a thermos of coffee, the same way I used to when Isabel was alive. I could almost hear her voice in the wind. You did what had to be done, George. Maybe. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like cleaning up after a long storm, necessary, but heavy. I looked out at the barn and remembered the first day Ethan came here, shaking my hand, calling me, sir, saying he admired how I'd built something from nothing. He'd studied my habits, my kindness, my patience, and used all of it against me. But now he'd have to live with the truth. Not behind a desk. Not behind a screen. Behind bars. 2 days later, Sarah called again. You sitting down? She asked. Always am when you call, I said. Well, the feds filed additional charges. Turns out he wasn't just defrauding the SBA. He'd also been funneling part of that grant money into a private crypto fund registered under his brother's name. IRS got involved. They're calling it $1 million laundering scheme. I let out a long breath. Guess the boy really wanted to be famous. Looks like he got his wish, she said. He'll be on every network tonight. I turned on the TV that evening for the first time in months. There he was, Ethan Myers, being escorted into a courthouse, the same smug face now pale and hollow. The headline read. Tech founder arrested in federal fraud scandal, used father-in-law's farm in scheme. The reporter's voice cut through the static. The whistleblower in this case, George Walker, declined to comment, but sources say his evidence was crucial in uncovering the fraud. I turned it off. I didn't need to watch the rest. The world could have its justice. Mine was already done. When Laura came into the living room later, she looked at the blank screen and then at me. It's strange, she said. I thought seeing him fall would make me feel better. It doesn't, I said. Because pain doesn't vanish. It just changes its shape. She nodded, quiet for a long time. Then, softly, can I stay here a while? You never left, I said. Outside, the field swayed gently under the night wind. Somewhere out there, the soil my father once turned over was still alive, still honest, still mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. The following week unfolded like a strange dream, half relief, half reckoning. The news cycle devoured Ethan's story, spinning it into a national headline about the dangers of startup greed and how one old farmer exposed $1 million scam. Reporters called me a hero, but that word sat wrong in my chest. Heroes fight for glory. I had just fought for the truth. By Wednesday, Ethan's name was everywhere, CNN, NBC, even an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. His photo, that confident grin from the wedding, was now plastered over the words, fraud, deception, greed. I didn't watch much of it, but every time the TV was on in the diner or the feed store, I caught people whispering, that's him. The farmer's son-in-law. Meanwhile, Laura stayed with me. The first few days, she barely spoke. She helped with chores in silence, feeding the hens, folding laundry, picking tomatoes from Isabel's old garden bed. At night, she'd sit by the fireplace with her coffee, staring into the flames. Sometimes, she'd whisper things I wasn't supposed to hear, how could I not see it, or, he fooled everyone. I never corrected her. I knew what guilt could do to a person. Friday morning, Sarah came by again. She had a folder under her arm and that same expression, half cop, half friend. "You might want to sit down, George," she said. "I'm already sitting," I replied. She placed the folder on the table. Federal prosecutors filed formal charges. Wire fraud, identity theft, and misuse of government funds. He's looking at 15 to 20 years. I nodded. And the others? His two partners made deals. They'll testify against him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the old wall clock ticking steadily behind us. Then Sarah smiled faintly. "You know, there's something satisfying about justice that doesn't need shouting." I looked out the window toward the fields. Quiet justice lasts longer. She laughed. "You really are from another time." "Maybe," I said. "But that time raised better men." That afternoon, I got a call I didn't expect. A number from KDSM Des Moines, a morning show producer. She asked if I'd appear live next week, to share my inspiring story. "No," I said. "But sir, America would love to." "Ma'am," I cut her off gently, "America doesn't need another man talking on TV. It needs men who keep their word." I hung up before she could argue. That evening, Laura joined me on the porch as the sun sank low over the cornfields. She held 2 mugs of coffee and handed me one. "Dad," she said quietly, "I talked to Ethan's lawyer. He's asking for a character statement, something from you that might reduce his sentence." I turned toward her slowly. "And what would you have me say?" She looked down. "That he's not all bad. That he made mistakes." I stared at the horizon for a long time before answering. "You can forgive a mistake, Laura. You can't excuse a pattern." She didn't reply. The silence between us stretched until it hurt. Finally, she whispered, "You're not wrong." I reached over and took her hand. "He fooled you because you have a good heart. That's not something to be ashamed of. But you need to understand something. There's a difference between being kind and being blind." She nodded, her fingers tightening around mine. "I think I finally do." The next morning, a letter came. It was official. The Department of Agriculture had reinstated my veteran-owned status and approved a grant to modernize the vineyard section Isabel and I had started years ago. It wasn't much, just enough to rebuild the irrigation and fix the greenhouse roof, but to me, it felt like the universe was resetting itself. I pinned the letter to the wall in my office, right beside a photograph of Isabel smiling under the apple tree. For the first time in a long time, I felt like she'd be proud of me again. A few days later, I drove into town with Laura. We stopped at the cafe for breakfast, and when we walked in, the whole place went quiet again, but not the way it used to. This time, people smiled. A few even clapped softly. Tom, my old friend, raised his coffee cup. "Heard you made the 6 o'clock news again, George. The reporter called you the conscience of Clearfield." I groaned. "The what?" "The conscience," he repeated, grinning. "Has a nice ring to it." Laura laughed, the first real laugh I'd heard from her in weeks. "Guess I should start charging for moral advice," I said. "Too late," Tom smirked. "We already take it for free." We spent that morning like old times, talking about crops, weather, and gossip that didn't matter. It was good, simple, human good. That night, when I got home, there was one voicemail waiting on the answering machine. The voice was familiar, but thin, almost broken. "George, it's Ethan." I froze. He continued, "They're moving me to Polk County Jail tomorrow." I know I don't deserve a word from you, but I needed to say it. You were right. About everything. About the farm. About what matters. I thought I could outsmart life, but life has a long memory. He paused. I'm sorry. For the wedding. For the farm. For everything. Static filled the line for a few seconds before it clicked off. I didn't replay it. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit there, somewhere between anger and forgiveness. The next morning, Laura found me sitting by the barn, oiling the hinges on the big red doors. Did you hear from him? She asked quietly. I nodded once. Are you going to reply? No, I said. Sometimes silence is the only reply that means something. She seemed to understand. That afternoon, Sarah stopped by again, holding a new set of papers. It's official, she said. The court froze his assets and ordered restitution. You'll get back what he stole. Might take a while, but it's coming. I smiled faintly. I'm not waiting on his money. I know, she said. But it's poetic, don't you think? The man who mocked you for your old ways ends up paying for them, literally. Poetic maybe, I said, but I'll settle for peaceful. As the days turned into weeks, the noise of the media finally died down. The cameras left, the articles stopped, and the world moved on to its next scandal. But on my land, things stayed the same, the way they were meant to. Laura began helping full-time, learning to mend fences, drive the old Ford tractor, and run the new greenhouse system. Watching her there, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, was like watching Isabel all over again. One evening, as we finished closing up the barn, Laura turned to me and said, You know, Mom always said the land keeps secrets. She was right, I said. It also tells the truth, if you listen long enough. The sun dipped low behind the fields, painting everything gold. The smell of earth and hay filled the air. For once, I didn't feel like a man out of time. I felt like a man exactly where he belonged. That night, I sat by the window, pen in hand, writing a letter I didn't plan to send. Dear Isabel. I kept my word. The land is still ours. The lies burned themselves out, and what's left is clean again. Laura's home, and she's learning. I think you'd like the woman she's become. You always said the soil remembers the hands that tend it with love. I hope it remembers mine kindly. I folded the letter and placed it inside her old recipe box, right beside the one she'd written me years ago. Then I turned off the lamp, letting the quiet of the farm fill the room. Justice had come and gone. What stayed was peace, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but makes a life worth living. Autumn came early that year. The mornings turned sharp and cool, the kind that made your breath visible and your coffee taste better. The cornfields had gone gold, ready for harvest, and the sky stretched clear for miles. I'd always loved this season, not just because it marked the end of the work cycle, but because it reminded me of the rhythm of life. You plant, you tend, you wait, you lose, you rebuild. It's the same pattern with land, love, or people. Laura had settled into the farm's rhythm too. She rose before sunrise, checked on the hens, and handled the accounts while I worked the fields. There was quiet between us now, not the kind that comes from pain, but the kind that grows from understanding. Some evenings, she'd sit on the porch with her coffee and look out at the trees. You know, she said one night, for years I thought the world moved too slow out here. Now I think it's the only place that ever moved right. I smiled. The city teaches noise. The farm teaches patience. She nodded. Guess I needed both. Meanwhile, the federal case against Ethan moved forward. He'd pleaded guilty after 2 of his partners testified, hoping for leniency. Sarah called one evening to give me the update. He's looking at about 12 years, George, she said. Maybe less with good behavior. Restitution's locked in. They're auctioning his assets next month. I don't want his money, I said. I know, she replied, but the world works on paper. Paper says he owes you. Paper can wait, I said, and hung up. A week later, something unexpected arrived, a letter from Ethan's mother, mailed from Nebraska. Her handwriting was shaky, her words careful. Mr. Walker. I don't expect forgiveness, and I know my son did terrible things. But I raised him alone, and I thought he was better. When I saw your face on the news, I cried, not because of what you did, but because of what he lost. I hope someday you'll believe he wasn't all bad. I hope Laura finds peace. I read the letter twice, folded it neatly, and put it in Isabel's recipe box beside my own. I didn't hate the woman. She'd lost a son long before the law took him. In November, the harvest came in stronger than I'd expected. The soil, after years of stress and neglect, seemed to breathe again. Maybe justice had a way of restoring things you couldn't see. Laura and I decided to reopen the old roadside market Isabel and I had built 30 years earlier. It had been shut down since Isabel's illness, but I could almost hear her voice, "The land gives, George, but only if you give it purpose." We cleaned out the old wooden stall, painted a new sign, and started selling produce and homemade jam again. The locals showed up one by one, old neighbors, new families, even strangers who'd read about The Farmer and the Scandal, and wanted to meet me in person. Most just shook my hand, said thank you, and moved on. A few told me their own stories, of sons-in-law, partners, or relatives who'd betrayed their trust. I listened to every one. Because I knew what that kind of betrayal did to a man's faith in others. One afternoon, a man in a suit showed up. He introduced himself as Michael Torres, a regional manager for the Veterans Agricultural Foundation. "We saw your case, Mr. Walker," he said, "and we were impressed. We'd like to fund your farm as a model for sustainable veteran operations." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean a grant?" "Not just that," he said. "A partnership. We want to make Walker Acres a pilot site for a mentorship program. Teach younger vets how to start from the ground up." I looked at Laura. She was smiling for the first time in weeks, real, bright, alive. "Let's do it," I said. By winter, the first group of veterans started showing up, 10 men and women, all different ages, all carrying their own ghosts. They worked the land, learned irrigation, rebuilt fences, and laughed again. Watching them brought something back into my life that I didn't even realize I'd lost: purpose. One of them, a Marine named Evan, said something I'll never forget. "You know, sir, when they told us you were the guy who took down some tech scammer, I figured you'd be bitter. But you're the calmest man I've ever met." I smiled. "Anger burns fast, son. But calm keeps the fire useful." He nodded slowly, like he was turning the words over in his mind. I think I needed to hear that. "Most of us do," I said. By Christmas, the snow had settled thick across the farm. We strung lights along the porch, played Isabel's old records, and filled the house with the smell of fresh bread and coffee. That night, Laura handed me a small wrapped box. "Open it," she said. Inside was a framed photo, me, Isabel, and Laura when she was 5, standing in front of the first tractor I ever bought. Beneath it, she'd added a brass plate engraved with a quote. "Respect isn't inherited. It's earned, row by row." I ran my fingers over the words, my throat tightening. "You made that up?" I asked. She smiled. "You did, years ago. I just listened." Later, when everyone was asleep, I stepped outside. The night was quiet, the sky heavy with stars. The same fields that once carried the weight of betrayal now shimmered under the snow, clean, new, full of promise. I thought about Ethan. Somewhere, he was probably sitting in a cold cell, replaying that wedding night in his head, realizing the same thing I had years ago: the world doesn't measure you by what you own. It measures you by what you honor. I took a long breath and whispered into the cold air, you can keep your headlines, son. I'll keep my peace. As I headed back inside, I noticed the porch light flicker and catch a thin layer of frost. For a moment, I saw Isabel's reflection in the window, soft smile, eyes like she used to have when she'd say, "You did right, George. You did right." And for the first time since that terrible night, I felt completely at rest. The next morning, I opened my journal, the one I'd started the day after the wedding, and wrote the final line. They laughed at the farmer who stayed small. But the ground remembers every seed he planted. Then I closed it, set it on the shelf beside Isabel's Bible, and poured myself another cup of coffee. The world had moved on, but my land, and my name, were exactly where they belonged. January rolled in quiet and hard. The kind of cold that stiffens the hinges on every gate and makes diesel engines think twice before turning over. We stacked wood to the rafters, covered the tractors, and settled into winter work, tools, books, and plans. 2 dates were circled on the kitchen calendar, January 18th, the federal asset auction tied to Ethan's case, and February 3rd, the county hearing for a conservation easement I'd petitioned. 1 day to put his mess to rest. 1 day to guard this place long after I'm dust. On the 18th, I didn't go to the courthouse. I brewed coffee at 5:30, checked the barns, and came back inside to find Laura in her robe scrolling the auction feed on a loaner tablet the foundation had left us. They sold the lake condo, she said, squinting. $281,000. Watches, art, a ridiculous Italian bike he never rode. George, it's all going. Let it. By noon, a court clerk emailed a plain PDF, restitution, Walker, G, amount due after distribution, $92,410. 27, I stared at the number a long while. Old me would have mailed it back out of spite. New me took a breath and said, we'll fix fences. Pay Evan 2 months ahead. Order the greenhouse kit you keep circling. Laura slid her hand into mine and squeezed. And the school program, she added. You promised the 5th graders. That afternoon, Channel 12 called asking for an interview, the farmer who didn't back down. I said no thank you. Folks don't plant better because a man is on TV. They plant better because someone hands them a shovel and stands beside them when the weather turns. The veterans class didn't slow for weather. We met 3 days a week in the machine shed with an old propane heater rattling like a chest cold. I taught soil tests and bookkeeping. Laura ran the book's lesson where she wrote, in block letters on the whiteboard, cash flow is a season, not a day. Evan, the Marine, had his first bad one in late January. A pallet slipped off the loader forks and crashed onto gravel, the sound pinned him to the floor. Hands over his head. Breath gone. The old me would have barked orders. The farmer me turned down the heater, crouched, and said, count the bolts with me. We counted 41 scattered bolts into a coffee can, one by one, until his breath matched the numbers. Later he said, you didn't try to fix it fast. I said, fast doesn't stick. On January 29th, a letter arrived from a prison mailroom in Oklahoma. Black ink on cheap white paper. Mr. Walker, I don't merit your time. I know what I did. I mocked the thing you built, and I hit it with greed. I'm sorry. If you allow, I want my remaining 401k, what's left, transferred to the Veterans Agricultural Foundation in your county. Warden says you have to consent because of the order of restitution. I also know saying sorry doesn't plant a seed. I'm writing it anyway. Ethan. I read it twice and set it beside the ledger where I track diesel and seed. Laura watched my face. What do you think? I think a man in a box is trying to pry open a window. Let him. We signed the consent form and mailed it with a stamped return envelope. It wasn't absolution. It was arithmetic, turn bad money into good work. February 3rd came clear and brittle. We drove into town for the easement hearing. The board sat under buzzing lights with binders and coffee like every committee since the dawn of committees. I stood, hat in my hands, and explained what a 99-year conservation easement meant: no subdivision, no conversion to commercial use, no paving over the bottom pasture where we'd found arrowheads in 1984. A rep from Finger Lakes Land Trust slid a map across the table. Laura spoke last. "We're not freezing a museum, we're protecting a living farm. There's a difference." Unanimous approval. The chairwoman smiled and said, "Mr. Walker, you just made my evening." I shook hands, we signed the papers, and when the clerk stamped the county seal, I felt something deep inside settle, like a post driven home. The next morning, we hosted the school kids. 22 fifth graders, each in a hat too big or a scarf they were already losing. We lined them up by the hoop house and passed around soil cores. A boy named Miles asked, "How do you know if dirt is good?" I broke a plug in half. "Smell it." He sniffed, nose wrinkling, then grinned. "It smells like rain." "Exactly," I said. "Good soil smells alive." Laura showed them the sap testing meter and explained bricks like it was a magic trick. It is, in its way. At lunch, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Later, out by the fence line, I listened. It was Sarah. "Dad, it's me. I'm parked at the end of your drive. I don't want to walk in if you're busy." I could hear the engine idling, the small tremor she gets when she's trying not to cry. I told Laura and headed down the lane. Sarah stood beside a used Subaru with a cracked taillight. No jewelry, no designer coat. A paper cup in her hand steamed in the cold. "Before you say anything," she blurted, "I filed for annulment. I sold the last of the furniture. I paid Mom's hospital copay that I should have paid already. I'm living in a one-bedroom 2 blocks from the clinic." I held up a hand. "You don't owe me a ledger." She swallowed. Maybe I needed to write one anyway. We stood there, steam rising from the cup, our breath mixing with it. "Come up to the house," I said. Laura made stew. "We've got bread." On the walk she asked, "What's that sign?" She meant the new placard by the mailbox: "Walker Acres, established 1981, conserved 2025. I said, "It means your children's children will know where they are." She looked down at her boots. "If I have any," she whispered. That caught me. Not because of babies, but because hope had snuck back into her voice. We ate in the kitchen. She told us about the clinic, how she'd started staying late on Thursdays to help the nurse who ran the food pantry. "We give out boxes. Beans, rice, apples when we can find them." She glanced at me. Could I buy apples from you? Wholesale. I'll pay fair." I laughed. "We don't sell apples." She froze, mortified. I let it hang a beat, then added, "We give them. You can take 6 crates every week through March. Tell the nurse to call Laura about storage." She covered her eyes and wept, soft and messy, the way kids do when they've finally put the heavy thing down. Laura wiped the tears with a dish towel and said, "Welcome home, honey." Middle of February, Channel 12 called again, this time not for me. The anchor wanted to cover the veteran program expanding from 10 to 24 trainees by summer, funded partly by a transfer labeled $18,972. 14 from a prisoner 401k. I let Michael Torres talk. I stayed in the shed checking a seed plate for soybeans. Fame is fertilizer for weeds. That weekend, the veterans and I built the new 30 by 72 greenhouse. It took 2 days, 12 pairs of hands, and exactly 216 self-tapping screws. Evan climbed the ladder with the last ridge cap, paused, and shouted, "Sarge," he still called me that sometimes, "when do we plant?" I checked the soil thermometer jammed into the raised bed, 46 degrees Fahrenheit. "Week and a half," I said. "Radishes first." They're honest. On Sunday night, Sarah came by with a spiral notebook. I made a budget, she said, sliding it across the table. It had rent, gas, student loans, a line for giving I didn't comment on, and a box at the bottom labeled future with $50 penciled in. "50's a start," I said. "So is scraping ice. Both get you where you're going." She smiled. "You always talk in tractors." I shrugged. "I talk in seasons." "Same thing." March thawed early. The lane turned to oatmeal and the creek filled with melt. On the first truly warm day, a battered sedan rolled up and parked by the roadside stand. A woman stepped out, late 50s, hair pulled back tight, hands folded like she was walking into church. "Mr. Walker?" she asked. "I'm Carolyn. Ethan's mother." Laura and I exchanged a glance and walked out together. She didn't ask to come in. She handed me a long envelope with a notarized form. "I sold his motorcycle," she said. "He bought it on credit. The lien holder will take most. There will be $1,140 left. He asked me to bring it to you for the school garden. He can't stop trying to fix things from far away." I told him that's not how fixing works. But I brought it anyway. Her voice didn't crack until the last sentence. Laura stepped forward and hugged her like they'd known each other all their lives. I signed the receipt and said, "We'll put parsley in for the kids." It doesn't know the name of who bought the seed. That night, after dishes, I pulled out the ledger where I track what comes in and what goes out. That isn't just money, the favors, the crates, the phone calls answered. I wrote, "Restitution isn't a check, it's a field you keep weeding." Then I closed the book and turned off the light. 2 days later, the county paper ran a small story, page B3, no photo, farm conservation easement finalized, Walker Acres protected 99 years. I clipped it, slid it behind a cracked pane of glass in the mudroom, and went to grease the baler. The world keeps moving. Grease points need grease. Spring waited at the edges. Seeds lay in paper packets on the workbench like a row of promises. The veterans stood taller, Sarah's cheeks had color, and Laura learned to like the slow afternoons that come after chores are done and there's still light to sit in. Some nights we ate late because the sunset ran long and the porch was too good to leave. If there was a lesson to write down, and I suppose I'm the sort who writes them down, it would be this: people think vengeance feels like closing a door. It doesn't. It's planting a gate. You keep it latched, you open it on purpose, and you know exactly who walks through. We had one more thing to do before the ground warmed. I took the easement map off the fridge, drew a small star in the northeast corner, and wrote, "Orchard, Sarah's." She cried when she saw it. Then we ordered 26 bare root trees, Liberty apples, Reliance peaches, a few Montmorency cherries, paying with a mix of the foundation grant and a wad of cash Sarah kept apologizing for not having last year. "Plant deep enough to cover the graft, but not deeper," I told her when the boxes arrived. "Water slow. Stake with twine, not wire. Wind teaches patience better than fathers do." We dug. We set each tree by hand. We tamped the soil with our boots until it held firm and the saplings stood up by themselves. By sundown, my back was stiff, my hands raw, and my heart easy. The orchard rows pointed toward the road like sentences that would take years to finish. Which is exactly how long truth is supposed to take. We packed up the shovels. Laura switched on the new solar porch light. Evan honked on his way out the lane. And for the first time since that awful toast in a rented suit, I realized the story I'd been living wasn't about a man on the news at all. It was about a farm that learned to speak for itself, and the people who finally learned to listen. Spring rolled in with a gentleness I hadn't felt in years. The orchard buds opened shyly, like they were testing the air before trusting it. Every morning smelled of wet soil and renewal, a scent I'd almost forgotten I needed. Life on the farm had found its rhythm again. The veterans program grew, a few of them started renting nearby land, and others stayed to help with the new greenhouse. Sarah's orchard thrived under her careful hands. She kept a journal, noting bloom dates, rainfall, and the way the trees seemed to breathe differently after rain. I'd catch her smiling sometimes, not the smile of a woman running from her past, but of someone finally running toward her life. Laura managed the market stand now, her laughter filling the space where silence used to live. She had a way with people, every customer left with more than produce, they left lighter. Sometimes she'd tell newcomers the story of the farm that wouldn't die, but she never mentioned names, only lessons. By early May, a letter arrived from the prison. I recognized the handwriting before I opened it. Mr. Walker. The Veterans Foundation sent me photos, the orchard, the new greenhouse. I don't deserve to see the good that grew from the damage I caused, but thank you for letting me witness it. I'm teaching a financial literacy class here now. Trying to do something decent with what's left of me. Tell Sarah. I'm glad she's home. Ethan. I didn't show the letter to anyone. I folded it once, slipped it into Isabel's recipe box beside the others, and whispered, "That's enough, son." That evening, Sarah brought coffee to the porch. The sun had just started to set, turning the orchard gold. She leaned against the railing, quiet for a while. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked finally. "I think about what people become when they stop listening to their conscience," I said. And I hope he learns to hear it again." We sat in silence. The wind moved through the young trees, making a sound like soft applause. Summer came fast. The veterans hosted their first open day for local families. Kids ran through the rows, laughing, faces streaked with dirt. A few parents asked if we'd expand the program to other counties. "Maybe," I told them, "if we can keep the weeds honest here first." That night, after everyone left, the three of us, Laura, Sarah, and I, sat by the fire pit. The stars were clear, the kind of sky that makes you believe the world still knows how to forgive itself. Sarah poked the embers with a stick. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think strength meant fighting back loud. But you never raised your voice. You just waited." "Waiting isn't weakness," I said. "It's knowing time will show who was right." She nodded slowly. "You were right, Dad. About everything." I smiled, staring into the flames. "Maybe. But being right doesn't make you happy. Doing right does." Weeks later, the first apples began to swell, small, green, imperfect. Sarah picked one too early, bit into it, and winced at the sourness. I laughed. "Not yet," I said. She grinned. "I know. I just wanted to see if it was real." It was. All of it was. Standing there, watching her in the orchard with the light catching her hair, I realized something simple and final: revenge fades, rebuilding endures. I turned toward the horizon, the same fields, the same sky, and felt a calm I hadn't known since Isabel's last harvest. Life had come full circle. The land had taken everything and given it back, cleaner, quieter, better. And somewhere far away, a man behind bars might finally understand what I'd learned long ago. Respect isn't about wealth. It's about roots. Roots that grow deepest in silence.